What's going on YouTube? I am B-Dobbins FTW, and the other day we saw a massive new batch of information drop about the upcoming Taken King expansion, and the big takeaway was basically that alongside the Taken King, Destiny is going to see a massive title update that fundamentally changes many aspects of the game. And I know a lot of fans are excited about these changes, but there is a rather significant downside to this news that I want to take a look at in this commentary. And that is that, any rational thinking year one Destiny player should obviously regret having bought this game in its first year. Not just regret it a little bit, but regret it a lot. And even worse, it seems like Activision figured out how to make a massive profit off of our regret. I feel kind of tricked. I'm really disappointed this Game Informer article couldn't have dropped like a day earlier than it did, because that's when I posted that original Destiny video arguing that you should wait to buy the Taken King. In fact, had that Game Informer article been released a day earlier, I probably would have just tacked this commentary onto the end of that commentary. This is really a part 2 commentary. Because so much of this new information reinforces the points I was trying to make with that commentary. As you'll recall in that video, I argued you should wait to buy the Taken King, because people who waited on buying the base game and first 2 expansions are not only getting the content for $80 less than what year 1 players paid for, but are also getting a better version of that content. However, at the time, I could only argue they were getting a slightly better version of the content, right? There were slight improvements. The main argument I was trying to make was that you would save a whole lot of money. And I was just trying to drive the slightly better product point home to reassure people that they weren't missing out on something by waiting for it. If you wait for it, worst case scenario, you're getting a slightly better version of that content. However, based on the information I had, I could only argue that it was slightly better, right? But knowing what we know now, not only are you year 2 Destiny players saving a bunch of money, but they are getting a dramatically improved and superior product. Not just slightly anymore, but a vastly superior product. If you play this game for the first time on the day that the Taken King comes out, you are going to be playing a 9 out of 10 game, most likely. Let's just go over some of the improvements they're making real quick. They've brought in a new voice actor for Dinklebot. Obviously, Dinklebot's voice acting got kind of trashed. As you play through the world, the new and improved Dinklebot will scan shit and give you background lore information on it. What I think they're doing is essentially making the Grimoire cards accessible in the game via the Dinklebot. So, you go up to a Cabal soldier, there's some sort of button you can hit to scan it, and Dinklebot will give you some information on that particular AI or area or environment or object or whatever. The tower and its NPCs have been retooled to offer quests, stories, insight into the world as you level up your character from 1 through 40, right? So we're talking, the gunsmith and the cryptarch or whatever. So that's not just Taken King stuff, that's throughout the entire base game as well. That you have this added narrative and a more diversified selection of content. The entire base game and first 2 expansions have been retooled in general for narrative and access purposes. So, for example, the Reef is open to you after meeting the Queen for the first time. They're including a bunch of new cutscenes. The character subclasses, old and new, have their own quest lines for each subclass. There's going to be content that explores previous endgame features, such as the Vault of Glass, and furthers the story even after having finished the story missions. So this stuff, a lot of this stuff is kind of vague, but presumably these new players will actually have some context for who Atheon is and why they are fighting him, which is what I wished I had back then. It would have made it an improved experience, right? So suddenly the base game and the first 2 expansions have a story. That huge hole that's been missing for every year 1 player will be filled in for year 2 players. Not only that, but they are dramatically changing the progression system. This is the big thing, in a way that diversifies content and seemingly cuts out any and all grind and repetition. Now they've come out and said they're getting rid of the light system altogether, and that in the future, from levels 1 through 40, you will have an experience-based system. It sounds like a more traditional progression system, without all this, using light levels to level up your armor, and then it's tied to your armor. It sounds like they're moving to something more traditional. We don't know the specifics of that yet, but they've said it's being changed to, and I quote, a more streamlined and consistent experience. I.e., a better experience. Sounds like new players are getting a better experience with base game progression. Now, year 1 players can go back and re-progress from level 1 just for the sake of experiencing that more enjoyable progression experience, but that would seem kind of redundant and self-defeating, just progressing for the sake of progressing. Trying to re-experience progression that you've already progressed through, just because now the progression might be a little less frustrating, a little more streamlined and consistent, as they would say. The gunsmith now has a rep, and you can earn rep by testing his prototype weapons in the field, and when you reach a certain rep, you can access Arms Day, which is a weekly purchase that allows you to buy legendary guns with Glimmer, so finally your Glimmer is actually useful for something more than ammo syntheses. Crucible and Vanguard marks have been combined into one universal legendary mark. That opens up so much more opportunity for expedient progression. You know, it used to be if something cost over 100 marks, you couldn't get it in 1 week. Now that's not the case. Hadronic Essences, armor plating have been replaced by armor materials, which makes it a lot easier to upgrade your armor generally speaking. You're no longer forced to wear a class item when leveling up new Monarchy, Dead Orbit, or Future War Cult. You can just pledge to them, and that makes that process a lot simpler and more efficient. You can turn in materials to these above factions for a reputation gain, which is going to let you level up your reputation like 10 times faster than in the past. And lastly, weekly Crucible and Trials bounties. You complete all 5 of the weeklies for the week, and you gain access to a 6th that has a chance to reward you either with a legendary or exotic, which is going to go a long ways towards letting you progress that much faster. All this stuff taken together means that playing through Destiny, not just the Taken King, but I'm talking about starting at level 1, playing through this game is going to be so much more enjoyable than it was for a year 1 player. And like I was just saying, you know, the sad truth is that although year 1 players can start a new character and go through the whole game from level 1, it won't be the same. You know, year 1 Destiny players have already had to replay every story mission and every strike and raid so many times that even with these added features, we won't be able to experience that content in the same fulfilling way as these new players. You know, even with these added features, playing through that content will still be a grind, because how could it not be after playing through Destiny's original unmodified progression system that had us playing through every single story mission, you know, more times than I care to count. Especially for someone who has more than one maxed out character. You know, like, it's cool that those story missions are going to have some added narrative, and that, you know, the new Dinklebot will be able to give you some story and insight into those missions as you play through them, but it's like, it's still not going to be as enjoyable as it could have been because you've already played through it 10 million times. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you've eaten a cake without frosting dozens and dozens of times. Now you go back, they finally put the frosting and some sprinkles on the motherfucker, but it's like you've already had that cake so much that it's still not as good as it could have been if you had had it in its full form from the beginning. Or it's kind of like water, you know, if you go a really, really long time without drinking water, if you like sit in the jacuzzi for like an hour and then you get out, that first sip of water, it's so good, it tastes like sex. Okay, but it's like year 1 Destiny players, when they first drank that water, it was like lukewarm, you know what I mean? So it wasn't that great. And now they've drank that water so much that now that it's been super cooled down, yeah, it's still good to drink that water, but it's not as good as it would have been if it was the first time drinking that water. You know what I mean? And it's like now, with year 2 Destiny players are getting this like super cooled ice water. And it's freaking incredible when you drink it. But because year 1 Destiny players have already drank so much water, they're not getting that same, you know, ecstatic rush from drinking the water. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you ever played a sport, like you play football or something, that first drink of water when you're done with practice, it's fucking heavenly. You know what I'm talking about. So, you know, look, if you've never played Destiny before, then that Legendary Edition is a good deal, and lucky you, because you get an experience that the millions of year 1 Destiny players will never truly be able to recapture, at least on this game. It'd be one thing if they had released an entire 4th new class, right? You know, you got your Warlock, Titan, Hunter, they come out with, you know, with some other new entire class. That might have done the trick. That might have been enough reason to replay through the entire game from 1 through 40. But it just wasn't meant to be. Now, if you've played Destiny before, which I'm sure is most of you, you're still going to want to wait for the Taken King. Because although that stuff with the story being implemented into the gameplay and stuff like that is Bungie responding to fans' complaints, all these huge changes they're making to the progression system, these changes that are cutting out more and more repetition, reducing grind, and staving off boredom that much longer, a lot of that shit is because they know there's going to be a lot of first-time players buying this Legendary Edition, because to be fair, it is a good deal, and they need to make sure level 1 can get to level 34 or whatever super fast so they can access the Taken King and play with their friends who've already had the game, or I'm sure in some cases their friends will be making new characters to experience the freshly enhanced base game anyway, so whatever, I digress. But my point is, the major progression changes that are streamlining the shit and making it more fun and less repetitive, those changes are going to continue with every new DLC release, just as we've seen similar changes with every DLC release in the past. So the game's dramatic improvement with the Taken King, I hope, proves my point that the game will be even better as time goes on, and will of course be at even lower and lower prices. And in fact, if you don't play Destiny for a really long time, if you wait to buy any new stuff, and you wait till like that final expansion drops, there's 2 more coming, a lot of the feelings of monotony and familiarity with the base game might have worn off by then, and you might even be able to go back and come close to re-experiencing that shit as it was truly meant to be experienced. It's like jerking off, right? Have you ever held off on jerking off for like a week, and then when you finally do, it just is like a stupidly incredible, you know, gallon of milk, shock and awe, explosion? People who haven't ever touched Destiny are about to have a pretty intense jerk-off session when the Taken King drops. And if you wait for the next DLC or whatever, you too can have that improved experience. And more than that, you know, I think people should just wait to buy the Taken King out of protest. I mean, year one players paid $100 to beta test this incomplete game, period. The people getting that $60 Legendary Edition, that's the player that every Destiny player should want to be. They are getting the most content, the highest quality content that's been subject to a year-long beta conducted with millions of testers, and they get that content for about $80 cheaper than what year one players paid for the same shit. It feels like they are finally completing the game, but the significance of these revisions also suggests they knew how incomplete it was when it shipped. Not to mention there's evidence of some cut content from the main game, such as this area in this clip, the bunker, and that's been in the game since For the Dark Below. We still have not seen this forest area that was present in game trailers a year before the game was released. I also think the new subclasses are very suspicious. I would bet money that those were cut out of the main game. You know, this third box here under the subclass has always been there, even since the beta. The only alternative explanation for why that third empty box has been there is that they were planning DLC that was scheduled for a year after release before the beta. It just doesn't make much sense to me. Because, and why else is this third empty box here? And it would make sense that each class had a subclass and all three elements from the get-go, you know what I mean? Now, why would they take out the subclasses and leave in the boxes? I don't know. I wonder the same thing about all the DLC areas that have been glitched into. The only plausible answer I can think of is that it's a waste of fucking time taking everything out and then having to put the shit back in, especially because code is like a Jenga tower. You know, you mess with one little itty-bitty fucking detail and the whole thing crashes. But what they've done is released a 6 out of 10 game and then gradually charged us an arm and a leg to make it a 9 out of 10 game. They turned a massive profit on under-delivering and then charging to fill in the gaps. The highest quality product is rarely the most profitable product. McDonald's didn't erect one of the most profitable worldwide restaurant conglomerates in history because it had the highest quality food. Its success was the result of an ingenious business model that relied on food that looked good and smelled good and tasted really fucking good, but ultimately was entirely devoid of any actual substance. And the genius of that is that the substance is the expensive part to make, whether it's a game or a burger, and it's also the part that the consumer has a much harder time detecting and accurately assessing, because it's not something they can see or taste or even smell. They have to feel it in their tummy, right? But the tragic irony is that it's the most important part, so they can take these fake burgers, sell the shit at artificially low prices, and then beat out all the real burgers that are actually good burgers. Destiny's been the same way. It had a great marketing campaign, but for its first year of existence, it's been an average game with a stunningly low amount of content, artificially inflated play times based on replaying content in a meaningless predetermined quest for RNG. Destiny is a McDonald's cheeseburger, only now they are taking the cheeseburger, sticking a bunch of produce in there, putting it on a whole grain bun maybe, or whatever. I know the analogy gets a little weird here, but stick with me. Now they give this burger some nutritional value, and compared to the old shitty burger, this burger is great. Not only does it look good, taste good, smell good, but now you actually feel full when you eat it. You feel full for longer than, you know, the first 30 minutes after eating it. But the joke is that the new and improved burger is only as good as any other real burger ever was. They set the bar so low for themselves with the original launch that now that they are completing the game, everybody's busting a nut like it's a big deal, when in fact this only highlights how inappropriate it was that this game didn't ship with a coherent story and sufficient amount of content in the first place. But the big difference is McDonald's has never really tried to pretend their burgers were healthy, whereas Bungie clearly has no problem with that kind of false advertising. You know, in that recent Eurogamer interview with Luke Smith, while defending the Taken King price tag, Smith said, and I quote, "It's about the player judging the value of the content," right? You'll hear Bungie trot that line out a lot, especially when facing questions about their prices and or lack of content. It's about the player and their judgment of the value of the content. Alright, this is basically their way of saying, don't like it, don't buy it. But how can we accurately judge the value of the content when they run such misleading advertising campaigns? You know, after the amount of time they spent talking up the immersive universe and becoming legend and forging your own path, and all the background lore they let us access pre-release about each race in the darkness and the golden age and such, they released more story in their, you know, background lore and little teasers than there was in the actual game. And after all of that, how could anyone have possibly suspected the game would ship without a story? How could we possibly have judged it? And that's the problem with buying things before they come out. That's why you don't pre-order. But they should have been upfront about that. They should have been upfront about that. I feel strongly that they intentionally misled millions of customers by implying heavily that they had this, immersive, story-driven universe. Those are the exact words they used on several occasions. And then the game comes out and it doesn't have a story. I also think they relied pretty heavily on the amount of faith people put into the Bungie brand. It was never a terrible game, but this was Bungie. This was supposed to be the greatest game from Activision, who has arguably the deepest well of resources in the industry. It's like if Usain Bolt ran a 10-4 100-meter dash, okay? It's a decent time at the college level. But we bought tickets to this event looking to see him run the world record 9.6. And it's like, hey, if Usain just stepped on a nail or some shit, and he can still run fast, just not as fast as the world record time, okay, let me know. Let me have that information when deciding if I want to spend $60 on the ticket. But don't tell me he's gonna run a world record time and then bring my ass in there for a 10-4. If you want me to beta test your game, be upfront about it. And don't charge me $100 to do it and then turn around and sell the perfected product that's only perfected because I beta tested it. Don't turn around and sell that to someone else for $20, because that's a slap in my fucking face. For the win query of the day is looking back over the past year. What about the year one Destiny experience did you dislike the most? Whether it's the content or the deals or whatever. For me, it's collecting fucking spirit blooms. That shit was weak, son. This is B Dobbins signing out.